Hi everyone, this is Aaron for Zollotech. We're going to be comparing the iPad 2 to the Samsung Galaxy Tab 10.1. Now let's first show you the top accessory, since most of you have probably seen an iPad 2, but this is an accessory directly from Apple that allows the screen to turn on when it's open, folds up into a stand. You can buy lots of options like that for here, but we don't have the shut to shut it off, open to wake it up. That's built into a little magnetic system on the end. Let me go ahead and remove that so we can continue and compare the two. So here we have the iPad 2. This is actually the Wi-Fi version, but for the comparison that will be fine. This is the Wi-Fi version. There is a 3G version available, and it's the 32 gigabyte model. Here we have the Samsung Galaxy Tab 10.1 4G Verizon version, which is exclusive in the United States. So it's not easy to come by in some areas where there's a lawsuit between these two for the Galaxy Tab looking too much like the iPad, and we'll go over that in a moment. Let's first talk about cost. Now, the iPad 2 starts at $499 for Wi-Fi only and goes up to, I believe it's $829 if you add 3G and 64 gigabytes. So the $499 version has 16 gigabytes. This happens to be the 32 gig Wi-Fi, so tack on another 100 at $600. The Verizon Samsung Galaxy Tab 10.1 is $529 for 16 gigabytes or $629 for 32 gigabytes. However, you must sign a 2-year contract in order to have this, so it's pretty expensive over 2 years. It's nice that you have the wireless connectivity on the go, but on the iPad you can actually turn that on and off monthly if you choose to go for the Wi-Fi plus 3G version, which adds $129, but no contract. So in my opinion, the iPad's the win there. Let's talk about the processors inside. I have these turned off purposely so that we can kind of do a quick boot up comparison. While that's not terribly relevant, I thought we'd just kind of boot them up and see which one wins. So we have a dual core processor in the iPad 2, the A5 processor, and we have, I believe, 512 megabytes of RAM. In here we have a dual core 1 gigahertz processor and a gigabyte of RAM. So let's go ahead and turn these on. I'm going to turn this way just to make it a little bit easier for me. And we have the switch on the side here that turns it on. Now that switch is in a different spot depending where you live. On the Verizon version, there we go. On the Verizon version, they're on the side. We have our volume buttons on the side, and we'll go over the actual specs first, but we'll wait for them to boot up. And it's still booting, both of them. And both of these have apps on there. They're not the stock default one. And this is actually running iOS 5, so it's a pretty fair comparison, and we have Honeycomb 3.1 on here, I believe. Let's go ahead and wait for them to boot up. The iPad's up. This tablet's up. Let's go ahead and unlock it. Unlock this one. So as you can see, this one is meant kind of to be held in this orientation, and this one's kind of meant to be held, and that's a notification. This is meant to be held in a vertical or portrait orientation. And I kind of like the portrait better. This is really a matter of what you prefer. It's not a big deal. Now let's talk about the externals of this first, because that's kind of what the lawsuit's about, how similar they are. So as you can see, as I mentioned before, we have the iPad 2 in portrait mode, or portrait, and the Galaxy Tab in landscape. Now, as far as similarities go, I'm not really sure how much different you can make a tablet. I can see making the interface differently, but you know, you've got a piece of glass, a bezel, where you've got things to attach it to the back, and that's about it. So on the iPad, you can see clearly we have a camera here, and it's easier to see on the white version. So we have a camera here, our home button here. That's all on the front. On the Galaxy Tab, and for the sake of this argument, I'm going to turn it this way. On the Galaxy Tab, we have screen, bezel, cameras on the side because it's meant to be held in landscape, and we have pretty much nothing else. We have no home button on this. That's controlled on the screen of Android. Let's take a look at the dock connectors. On the bottom we have dock connectors. They look extremely similar, and this is a part where I don't know why Samsung did this. They're very similar, but they don't work together. So you've got your dock connector here, dock connector there, proprietary on the Galaxy Tab. We have a microphone on the bottom here. The microphone on the iPad is on the top, up here. On the iPad, it's not really that similar there. The sleep-wake button on the Galaxy Tab is right here on the left side. There's a speaker here. There's a volume rocker here. There's also a speaker outlet on this side, so we have stereo. On the iPad 2, we have our 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, sleep-wake on the top. On this side, we have nothing. We went over the dock connector. And here we have our volume rocker and anti-lock or lock or rotate switch. Depending on what you set this up for, you can do it for volume or rotate. And we have a speaker down here. So they're really not as similar as far as layout as maybe Apple is arguing. Let's look at the back quick. On the back, we have a 3 megapixel camera with flash. On the back of the iPad 2, we have I believe it's less than 1 megapixel camera. Pretty poor. And that's it, and our Apple logo. So there's not a whole lot going on, and I actually have a screen or a shield on the back rather. And on here we have the flash. So there's not too similar really. The camera on the front of this is 2 megapixels. So we have nicer equipment in the Galaxy Tab as far as cameras go. So let's go ahead and turn them on and talk about the operating system. Now, if you like Android, I'm waiting for it to rotate, there we go. If you like Android, you're going to like this tablet. It runs Honeycomb, you unlock it like this. It's completely customizable. On the iPad, it's not as customizable. It's your typical iPhone, iPad configuration with your apps here, and you can put them in folders like this. Everything is nicely organized, depending on how you want it, but it's not quite the same as customizing. Me personally, I'm not into customizing, but there are probably more than the majority that are into customizing. So here you can see I've got some icons, and up here we have an app drawer. So that's kind of hidden. They're in two different spaces where we've got apps that are here, we've got my apps, and that's really it. I don't have a ton on here. We go back to home by hitting this button. We can go back by hitting back. We can see what's open by hitting this button. There's not really a whole lot open. So that's similar but not, and it's a different take on the operating system. Here we have notifications, and different notifications come in like this, and we can get rid of them just by tapping. So that's pretty nice. Now on iOS 5, we do have an app drawer with notifications. You can see there's new events on the calendars, and you have that. So iOS 5 adds some differences. I'm not going to go over all of them, but you can split the keyboard where you can't do that on Android, at least not by stock anyway, or not by default. So let's go into the web browsers. I don't know what's on here, but let's go ahead and go to Zollotech. We'll go here, and we'll go to, was on a product page of the last thing I was reviewing. Let's go ahead and go to, and as you can see, we've got HTML5 on both and Flash on the Galaxy Tab. Now, I'm not a big fan of Flash on tablets, but it is what it is. You may either use it or you might not. And as you may have seen, I was signed into Google Plus because this is an Android tablet. It just signed me in. So here you can see different modes. One's portrait, one's landscape. We can scroll. Everything appears to work pretty fast. I will say that the iPad is a little bit smoother when you're scrolling through web pages. You can see it's a little bit choppy here. The sensitivity isn't quite the same. So let's go to the same thing. They're very close, but for some reason, sometimes Android gets a little bit choppy here. We have tabs in both browsers with iOS 5, and with the keyboard on iOS 5, we can split the keyboard. Like I said, that's not available as default on here, but Samsung has included a very nice keyboard that does a great job and has www and makes things pretty easy to type. And then it switches to .com when you want to use it. But either way, it's a nice keyboard. It does the job. Let's go home. See, no home button. We hit home. There's not a whole lot more to go over as far as the tablets themselves, other than that you've got 4G constantly on here in Android, which is hugely customizable. You also have the music setup that Google has that's now in beta, where you can upload all of your music and get it here, which is nice. And Apple has something coming soon for iCloud with that, but it's not quite the same thing. So you can see here's all the music I have on here, and that's pulling from the cloud, and I can just play that. I don't have to download it. I can download it, but I don't have to. Let's talk about the App Store. Now, the app market on iPads and iPhones is well established, and just about everybody knows that. Let's go to the market here quick. We'll go to the App Store, and we have featured, we have apps. The App Store on iPad is well established. People buy a lot of things on there, and you have some really quality apps because of that. Android has a lot of quality apps, but there's not as many tablet apps. You can see it's staff favorites for tablets, and there's a bunch. Oops, hit that. There's a bunch of different apps that you can go through, so you're not going to be at any time lacking for apps. It's just going to be different apps than what you get over here, and sometimes you'll have the same. But it's growing every day, and tons of people are developing for Android as well as iOS, so there's not an issue there. Currently, though, I think the quality of apps are better on the iPad. That doesn't mean it won't change, and there aren't some great apps on Android, but it's getting there, and it's just not quite there yet. Other than what we've already mentioned, there's really cameras. We talked about that a little bit, but this has such better cameras on it. They're still not up to par of, say, a Android or iPhone device, but they're much better camera on the Galaxy Tab than on the iPad 2. You can check out the cameras in different tests I've done before. I've done a test between the iPad 2 and the Zoom, and I've also done a review of the Galaxy Tab recently where I show the camera quickly. Let me show you one more thing before we go. Let me show you the multitasking. We opened a couple things. Let me open Gmail. Let me open Music. I did that before. On Android, we hit this button here, and it shows me what I was last in, so I can just quickly switch. We go back home, we hit this button, we go back here, go back to the browser. You see how fast that is, and you can switch between apps quickly. On the iPad, it suspends the apps, and you double tap, and then you can go into your app. So if we go to Safari, it'll open Safari. If we double tap, go back to the App Store. It shifts out of the way and goes to the App Store. I think the multitasking on Android that they've done in Honeycomb is far better than the way you do it in iOS, where you double tap, it opens this little drawer, and then you tap. It's just easier to hit one button, hit what you want, switch, hit the button here, switch back. There's no double tap, slide through all your apps. This just is in a nice, convenient row, and it is what it is, and that's what you get. So it's pretty nice, and I really like that. It's really a pleasure to use both of these devices. They're both fast. They're both feel like you're using something that's modern and nice. The cost difference is really the big determining factor for which one to get. I don't know that there's much more to cover between the two, but if you want to see any specific comparisons between both of them, please feel free to comment below or message me, and I'll try and compare both of them for you. I also have the HP touchpad I can compare with and the Zoom, so if you'd like to see any comparisons and you're trying to make up your mind between any of these, please feel free to comment below or message me and let me know. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I always appreciate that. This is Aaron. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.